I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The lifestyle medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and well-being. Well, hello there, my good friend Simon Matthews. How's the weather in Spain?
The weather in Spain is beautiful right now. It's we're approaching the otoño, and so the weather's just cooling off a little bit. But highs of about 31 degrees, maybe high 20s, low 30s. Overnight lows are about 16, 17. It's just a perfect time of year. I'm finding that I don't. So back in summer, I would go running at 6 or 6:30 in the morning because it's just. I mean, at 6 or 6:30 in the morning in summer, it's already sort of 22, 23 degrees. But right now, I'm finding that I can go running, later in the day quite comfortably. So, yeah, lovely time of year. Yeah,
very nice. I'm glad to hear that it's not raining on the plains.
It's not. It is not raining on the plains. Although there was rain forecast for last night, and it didn't happen. So there you go.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
All right. So I've actually learned a whole lot from you, and I hope that warms your heart tonight. But one of them is that you are definitely my go-to behaviour change expert. And of course, you take all the behaviour change units at Avondale University in the lifestyle medicine course here. So we're going to talk about behaviour change.
We are, and you and I have I think it's true to say, have a shared favourite academic paper, don't we?
I'm about to learn which one that is. We may well. Tell me. Yes, I know which you're referring to.
You do know which one it is.
I do.
So why don't you tell us about that paper?
Well, I have always been fascinated by why it is that we humans do the things that we do, and often the crazy things that we do. And then even to take that one step further, how can you help people to change the crazy things that they do? And so I saw this paper come out, and it was a scoping review of all of the behaviour change theories. And I thought, at last, someone is going to tell us, how to make us humans behave the way that we should. Anyway, so I remember reading the abstract, and it said, so we did this scoping review, and they'd identified, and you correct me if I've got the number wrong here, but I think there was 83 behaviour change theories.
82 in the abstract, and this is important.
Okay, 82 theories in the abstract. Yeah. And I thought, wow, well, there you go. They've just simplified it for me, haven't they? Now there are 82 behaviour change theories to wade through. Yeah. So, hey, my question to you, we have tell us about how they conclude.
Well, here's the funny thing. By the time the authors, and you and I have both written and published, papers in journals, so we know it takes somewhere between weeks and months for that process to unfold.
Even years.
Sometimes years. So by the time these authors got to the end of their paper, in the conclusion they were writing of the 83 theories. I love the unspoken implication there that, these theories of behaviour change are multiplying so rapidly that in the time it took us to write one academic paper, here's another one.
They're like rabbits. Behaviour change theories are like rabbits. So that being said, Simon, what's your favourite behaviour change theory?
Great question. And well, so here's the interesting thing. That scoping review was published in 2015, 9 years ago. And there were 83 by the end of that paper. But since then, we have, for example, ones that I'm aware of. There's the BJ Fogg theory of behaviour change, which is very, very simple and elegant. I quite appreciate that. There's two there's two others that come to mind. One written about in 2016 and one written about in 2019. The 2019 paper is called the multi-attribute utility theory. It's not strictly speaking a theory of health behaviour change, but it is a theory that speaks to why we make the choices we make. And the really, really précis version of it essentially is that we choose the things we choose based on the perceived value that the elements of it have. In other words, we weigh up the things that matter to us and make our choices accordingly. Probably my favourite theory, though, was written about in 2016, and it's referred to simply as the busyness theory of behaviour change. And essentially what it says is that you are much more likely to be successful at any given behavioural change if you are already involved in the process of making other changes in your life.
That's interesting.
Now that might seem a little bit that might seem, I don't know how it might seem to you, but there's a couple of elements that I think are worth unpacking there. The first is that intuitively that might seem not quite right, because a lot of times we hear people say, "Oh, I wish I had the time to," or "I'd love to do that. I just need to finish this, and then I'll be able to do that." This theory kind of says the opposite. No, don't wait to finish that. While you're doing that, embark on this as well, and you're much more likely to be successful. And if you stop and think about what the mechanism might be there, it starts to make a bit more sense. And I think the mechanism is essentially one of scaling and momentum. So if I don't know whether you've ever broken down in a car. Yeah, I'm sure you have. I'm 100% certain that at some stage in your life you've owned a car that's broken down at an inconvenient place. Think about what happens when you start pushing a car. The very beginning of that push is enormously difficult. You have to put a huge amount of effort into starting to push that car. Once it starts rolling, though, there's still effort there. It's not a free ride, but it's much less effort typically than it was, because you're now starting to get the benefit of the momentum of the car. And I think that's possibly the mechanism behind the busyness theory, that once we start building a bit of momentum in our lives, then adding other things is just not so difficult.
I quite like that. I often say, people talk about getting on a roll, and I say, how do you get on a roll?
Yeah,
you start rolling. That's what you do.
That's exactly right.
And your little car analogy, I think, is a good one. Actually, I have had my car broken down many, many times, which speaks volumes about the type of cars that I drive. But I have this vivid memory of one time we ran out of petrol, and it was actually on a bit of a hill. It was on the freeway, but it was on a hill, and I knew near the base of the hill was a service station. So I said to my wife, I said, "You hop in and steer. I'm going to get this thing rolling, and I think we'll probably be able to roll down the hill." Anyway, sure enough, we were not in the lane, clearly, because there's cars whizzing by, but in the service lane. I start pushing this thing, and it was hard to get going, but all of a sudden it started to get some momentum up, and in the end, it was going right at the top level of my sprinting ability. I managed to grab the roof rack on the top of the car, and then jump. I seriously remember this. I jumped then onto the tow bar, so now I'm holding onto the roof rack, balancing on this tow bar at the back of the car, and we are getting some serious pace up now coming down the hill. And I'm saying to my wife, Sarah, I'm saying, "Just keep it dancing, Maria, keep it dancing," because I'm thinking we might get the whole roll to this thing. But I was waiting for a police car to come past and go, "What on earth is this dude doing, rolling down the hole at a rapid
crazy lady trying to shake this guy off the back of a car?"
I think so. Exactly right. So I like that analogy, that idea of getting it
just
rolling,
getting moving. I do have another. I mean, possibly my all-time general theory of behavioural change is actually, it's essentially a theory of economics. So let me illustrate it for you right now. Tell me about your least favourite exercise. The exercise that you should do, but you really, really don't like doing.
I think it's probably some sort of sprinting activity. I'm useless at sprinting.
Okay, all right. So sprinting maybe 50 metres, say?
Yeah.
Or 100? Which one's worse, 50 or 100 for you?
Shorter is worse.
So sprinting
Yeah.
50 meters. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I said to you right now, oh, actually, before I ask you that, let me ask you to tell me about something that you really love getting. Now, I know something about you, so I've got a suspicion about what that might be, but something that you really, really enjoy and love having in your life.
I I actually really, really like it when I receive an unsolicited compliment, like that someone says, I'm a words of affirmation love language person. So if
Okay,
I
all
have
right.
someone say to me, "Hey, you know what, really appreciated this thing that you did, or found that really helpful," that that goes a long, long way for me.
Okay.
That lights me
So
up.
so it's not the one I was thinking of. The one I was thinking of also
Mm.
starts with C,
Oh,
but it
chocolate.
starts. That's the one.
I am partial to chocolate. That is my
Okay.
vice, but I figure it's not a terrible one.
Okay. So here's the deal. Right now, I want you by the end of the day there where you are. So it's just coming up on 5 p.m. for you. By the end
Mm,
of the day, I want you to complete 50 50-meter sprints. Are you going to go out and do it?
probably not.
Just on the basis of me asking?
Even though the weight that you have in my life, I would still say probably not.
Probably not. Okay. All right. But that's okay. That's okay because we're not at the end of the road yet. So I'm going to, what's your favorite chocolate?
Oh, I really like. There's a lint type of lint chocolate that I
Yeah.
really like. It's
Okay.
like a
So I'm going to
salted
offer,
caramel.
salted caramel. Okay. I'm going to offer
Mm,
you 1 bar of Lindt salted caramel chocolate to go and
mm.
do 50-meter sprints by the end of the day. Deal? No deal.
Oh, no, I don't think it'd happen still because
Five bars. Deal
oh,
or no deal?
mm, it's getting tempting. Probably
25
still no.
bars. Deal
Oh,
or no
okay.
deal?
All right. How are you going to deliver them from Spain? That's my
So
yeah.
there's my other favourite theory of behavioural change,
Mm,
incentive. Um, anyone can always incentivise themselves sufficiently
mm,
to make a behavioural change. But here's the thing about external incentives like chocolate bars. Um,
mm,
Once I've given you 25 chocolate bars, if I then go back and say, okay, we'll just do 50-meter sprints, I'm not going to give you anything,
mm,
you're going to tell me to take a flying leap.
mm,
There's no
mm.
way you will do that. So once the incentive is removed, of course, your
Yeah.
motivation goes with it.
Yeah,
So
and that's it's interesting. That just what you said there reminds me of that book, Punished by Rewards, and because this has bbeen documented amongst children too, where they
yeah,
actually got kids
yeah,
who were involved in play activities, and they said then the kids were just happily doing it because plays, there's intrinsic value in that, and you
yeah,
just enjoy it for the value of the activity. And then they started paying the kids to do those play activities, which the kids thought was just the best thing ever. And then when they said, okay, well, we're not going to pay you anymore, kids didn't want to participate. They didn't want to do that
yeah,
play activity that they found intrinsically valuable previously to the
yeah,
rewards.
yeah, yeah. So a bunch of theories. Some of them explain some elements of behavioural change. Some of them
Mm,
explain others. Some of them focus more on the individual. Some of them focus more on the elements around us, the context, and so on.
mm,
Some of them are really good at taking account of social determinants of health. Some aren't. Um, so if we look across at these 83 or 84, 85, 80, 86 theories, if we include busyness and BJ Fogg and so on, 86 theories of behavioural change. What do they all have in common? Well, I've looked across a number of these theories, and I think we can extract 6 principles that are common to all of those theories of behavioural change in one way or another, that are highly applicable in lifestyle medicine practice. So
mm.
I
Okay,
want to share.
you've
I want to share
spiked
them
my
with you.
interest.
want to share them with you now. So the first one of those common elements is, of course, the element of motivation. What actually leads us to want to do something. Now, interestingly, one of our lifestyle medicine colleagues, Jeff Young, in the United States, who does a lot of work in the area of the importance of resistance training in particular for optimal health, including metabolic health, has just shared some ideas about motivation and the idea that motivation can be trained. Now, I'm not sure that I agree with Jeff on this idea that you can train motivation, because if you think about training a muscle, for example, what you're doing is increasing the capacity of that muscle. So the muscle itself is growing in its complexity, growing in its capacity, and so on. I'm not sure that the same thing happens with motivation. I have a hunch that motivation might be, if we can kind of reify it in some way, if we can say this is motivation might just be sitting there all the time. We don't train it and grow it, but what we do is make stronger connections to it. We link ourselves more strongly to that motivation. It's a little like tying cables to it. If you tie a single cable to something to pull it, then you might be successful, or you might not. If you tie two cables, maybe a little bit more, 3, 4, 10, 20, 50, 100 cables. Once you've got many, many cables tied to something, you're much more likely to be successful in moving it. So I have a hunch that motivation might operate a little more in that way. Regardless, motivation is a really key part of behavioural change theories. And one of the easiest ways to start understanding motivation in clinical practice is simply by asking, what matters to you? What's important to you?
LIFT is supported by the LIFT Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The LIFT Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
Why do you want to do this? What will be different if you make this change? That's a super simple way to start connecting with motivation. And importantly, that helps people typically to connect with internal motivation rather than a chocolate bar, for example. A chocolate bar will do the job in the short term, but in the long term, we want to be curious about what's going to improve in your life. What do you want to be able to do 5 years from now that you can't currently do? If you're saying you want to lose weight, how come? What's making losing weight important for you, and so on. So that's factor number one, motivation. Factor number two, the interaction between the person and their environment. This goes all the way back. This is about an 80-year-old theory now from a psychologist named Kurt Lewin, arguably one of the brightest psychological minds ever. And Kurt Lewin essentially articulated this idea of behaviour being a function of the person and their environment. And you can express that mathematically. B equals a function of PE. So in other words, whatever we see come from a person, whatever behaviour we see come from a person, is not just from that person, it's from that person in that environment and therefore at that time. So this is important because it reminds us that motivation is not fixed, behaviour is not fixed. These things move and shift depending on the context that we're in. And I can show this to you right now. You've just said to me that for five chocolate bars you would not do.
It was 25. We
no,
agreed
you
on
would
25.
you would do it. You would do it for 25, but you wouldn't do it for 5. No, I'm not trying to review off chocolate bars. you wouldn't do it for 5. I'm going to change the context now. I'm going to ask you now to imagine that you're at a running track of some sort, and there are 5 or 6 other people whom you know, whom you respect, who it's important for you to be in relationship with. Those people are saying to you, "Hey, Darren, I'm just gonna knock out 50 metre sprints. I just feel like doing it. Want to join me?"
Yeah.
What are you going to say now?
Yeah, I'm in.
No chocolate. No chocolate. You're in. The context has changed, the environment has changed, and now your behaviour has changed accordingly.
Yeah.
So
are you talking?
That's Kurt Lewin's theory.
Are you referring to social environment then, or the physical environment people are immersed in?
Well, it can be both. Environment is a really broad term that certainly can describe social connections, and we'll talk more about that as well. But it can be physical environment as well.
Because there is some thinking around the nudge concept where, there are some people that have said people are so problematic trying to motivate them. Let's just set up an environment so that they're just nudged towar's making the behaviours
to do that.
Makes
it easy to do that behaviour. Yeah, there's great examples of nudges all over the world. There's the there's the fly etched on the men's urinals in various public toilets around the world. The famous aiming point. There's in a metro station in I want to say it's Denmark, but I'm not completely sure. They turned a set of stairs into a set of musical piano keys. So so there's an elevator and a set of stairs. Most people took the elevator until they made the stairs musical, and then people started walking up the stairs because they could produce. Yeah, exactly right. They could have some fun while they were doing it. So nudges are a really important element of this, and I think they're well explained by this idea of environment. But there's other sort of immediate environmental contexts that can shape our behaviour as well. I remember many years ago I was in Hong Kong for a conference, and it was a super hot, super humid day, and I took a trip out to just on the ferry. I took a trip from Hong Kong Island out to one of the smaller islands in the bay that had a lot of sort of nature tracks and walking tracks and so on. I think I had 3 litres of water with me. I took 3 litres of water with me, which I thought would be plenty. And I was drinking more through the day and so on. And eventually I ran out of water, and it was super, super hot, and I was still on the other side of the island from where I needed to be to get the ferry to go back. And I was starting to feel not fainter, but I was starting to feel tireder, more fatigued. I was finding it harder to concentrate my mind. If I had been walking around the city, I would have just sat down. I would have just sat down and rested. But in that context, I didn't want to do that because I had this fear that if I sat down, I wouldn't stand up again. So I forced myself to keep moving, even though my pace slowed dramatically, even though I was starting, at one point I started to get really overwhelmed by anxiety because there were few to no people around in this part of where I was walking. I'd drunk all my water. It's like 38 degrees, 85% humidity. I was having a really hard time, but I kept going. And so in that context, the environment shaped what I might do in a way that it wouldn't if I were in a different context. So this idea of person and environment, I think, is really important. And as clinicians and as practitioners, we always need to be mindful of the idea that something that might motivate in one setting doesn't necessarily motivate in another setting as well.
So motivation, environment.
Motivation, or interaction of person and environment. One of our favourites, stages of change. The idea that that you move through a process towards behavioural change, rather than it being binary. Either I'm doing something or I'm not. Our readiness to change increases over time, and there's a really elegant way of getting a sense of someone's readiness to change, and it's by thinking conceptually about what are the two things that describe readiness. Well, one is, how important is it for you to make that change right now? Not tomorrow or the next day or next week, but right now. How important is that change right now? And how confident do you feel to make that change right now? And if you can get a sense of those two things, you can get a sense of how ready the other person is to make a change. And the simplest way to do that is to ask a scaling question on a scale from 0 to 10, where 10's the highest. How important is this change to you to make right now?
And I've heard references to that whole idea of on a scale, how important it is to you, and how capable do you feel of achieving that? And unless people are sort of nudging the 7 out of 10, is it correct that really it's unlikely that they're going to follow through on that new behaviour?
Yeah, and yes, that's generally true, and the reason is that the lower levels are indicative of a different stage of readiness for change. So if we go back to the idea, if we use that stages of change model that starts with pre-contemplation and works all the way through to maintenance, it's the best known theory of stages of change, or best known model of stages of change. If someone is saying absolutely, I do not want to do that, or it doesn't matter how much I want to do it, I simply cannot do it, it's not possible for me to do that, then very clearly they're not considering in any way making a change. So increasing numbers on those scores are generally indicative of increasing progress towards readiness to change. 7 out of 10, in my experience, probably describes the cusp between preparation and action. It's that point where someone's just getting ready to actually, really invest themselves in this and start making a change. So that's the third principle. Fourth one, very famous one, another very famous psychologist, Albert Bandura, who only passed away a couple of years ago during the pandemic. The idea of self-efficacy, this kind of combination between if you like, our competence, our abilities, our skills, our resources to make a change, and the confidence that we have to be able to do that. And Bandura described four different mechanisms by which we can increase self-efficacy. One of those, of course, is just by getting out and doing it. Doing something different. Often just by small steps at a time. Second one is the idea of role models, having someone in your life that you can look at and model your own behaviour from. The third one is to connect really strongly with the reasons that you have for change, or the needs that you have for change, and that of course gets back to motivation. And the fourth one is to engage, if you like, in the whole body or the whole person experience of change. So not just the idea of doing a behaviour, but what does it feel like when you accomplish that? If you ran 50 metre sprints for no external incentive at all, and you were with a bunch of people doing the same thing, what are you going to experience? What's that going to feel like to you? And if I can invite you to start thinking about that and connecting with that, that's likely to lead to an increase in your sense of competence and confidence, i.e. self-efficacy, to be able to engage in that.
I love that. That's one of my favorite things, to be honest, to see someone who develops that belief in themselves and their ability to do something. And often it starts, as you say, just with that small little action. And I'm a big proponent of giving people small challenges, and it's challenge by choice. We need to respect people's autonomy, but giving them small things that you are confident they're going to win at. And then when you see someone actually have that win and you celebrate that win, and then they get onto that, hey, if I can do that, maybe I can do that. And for me, what I find so completely inspiring is when you come across characters that have just developed a whole new approach to life, that their life becomes expansive because they see that, what, I can do this. I've actually seen that, in I can think of a number of individuals who have actually really just really their life's taken off because of that belief in themselves and that belief in their ability to be able to affect change and do great things. It's fantastic to observe. It's inspiring.
It's a wonderful. It's a wonderful psychological concept, self-efficacy, that's deeply embedded across the field of psychology, and one of the nice things about it is that it immediately reflects, I think, a real world experience that we all have. It's very easy for all of us to connect with that sense of, I'm much more likely to do something when I have a sense that I've got the goods. It's possible for me to do this. Makes us engage in things more enthusiastically, helps us to be less doubtful about our capacities, helps us not to second guess ourselves, not to try and talk ourselves out of it, but rather talk ourselves into doing it. So lovely concept. So that's the fourth idea that we generally find across a very large number of theories of behavioural change. Number 5, of course, no surprises here, goal setting. The idea of actually having an aiming point, something specific that we're working towards. People are probably familiar with the idea of SMART goals: specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, time specific. I got to say, I'm not a massive fan of SMART goals for a couple of reasons. One is that there's no universal agreement on SMART. So I just said specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, time specific. But you'll hear other people talk about achievable rather than actionable. For me, achievable doesn't make so much sense, because if something's specific and measurable and I've thought it up, then in all likelihood it's achievable anyway. So the A becomes a little bit redundant. Similarly, some people say R is realistic. Well, again, if it's specific and measurable and achievable, then almost by definition it's realistic. So there's not broad agreement there. And the other criticism is that there's no theoretical underpinning for SMART goals. However, there is a fantastic theory of goals developed by two people called Locke, L-O-C-K-E, and Latham. And they've been working on these ideas for about 40 years now. It's called goal setting theory, GST. And Locke and Latham's principles of goal setting theory, I think are really wonderful. And essentially, there are 5 principles in their goal setting theory. First of all, is the goal clearly enough stated? Is there enough clarity there for me to be able to go and act on it? If I just say to you, run some sprints, then there's not a great deal of clarity there. If I say run 50 metre sprints, then there's a great deal of clarity. Secondly, is the goal sufficiently challenging? And this is really important. It's important that we create goals that actually stretch us and develop us. We see the same thing in the gym. Sometimes if you go into the gym, you'll see people, just kind of almost mindlessly bang out 10 or 12 chest presses or do 10 or 12 squats. They're just not working at a level that's actually going to develop any, muscle strength or endurance or capacity. You got to work right on the edge of your limit if you want to develop. Right on the edge of your capacity. And so that's built into this idea as well, that the idea that the goal is challenging. Thirdly, you mentioned the idea of autonomy before, and this is really important. A really key element in Locke and Latham's theory is, does the person themselves have a stake in this particular goal? Are they personally invested in it? So if I create a goal for you, No, you may engage in that. If we co-create a goal, you're more likely to engage in it. If you create the goal yourself that has personal meaning for you, then you're much more likely to work towards that, because you have that investment in it. Feedback mechanisms, of course, so that we can measure our progress, and also the other sort of really elegant idea that I like in goal setting theory is the idea of partialing out big goals into smaller goals, so that we can say, so for example, 50 meter sprints could be described as 10 lots of 5 by 50 meter sprints. So you do one lot of 5, that's a goal, then 2 lots of 5, that's the second goal, and so on. So thinking about how we can partial out big goals into smaller ones is really valuable. So Locke and Latham, I think, are really the voices to be listened to in terms of goal setting theory, but the notion of goal setting is important. And then finally, the last principle, which I think we find broadly common, is the idea of social connections and influences, which we alluded to before. And this is where we start looking at ideas of how we get rewarded for what we do, the extent to which that's external versus internal, the sorts of contracts that we might make either with ourselves or with other people. In a clinical context, it starts to get at the idea of the therapeutic alliance, which we've talked about before, that connection between physician and patient, or clinician and patient. And it also gets at the idea of the internalized values and beliefs and attitudes that we have about change. And they're the things, of course, that it really helps to be aware of in behavioural change. There's a really great theory of systemic behavioural change, which goes back a dozen or so years. It's articulated by someone called Donella Meadows, who sadly has passed away now. But she identifies 12 influences, if you like, on system change, and the most basic of those is at the level of simply an instruction to do something different. If I tell you to walk 50 metres, I can induce some sort of change, but it's a very, very low level change, not likely to have a broad impact on the system and so on. But if I can work with you around your beliefs and attitudes and values, and support you to, over time, shift your perspective of yourself, of what matters to you, of why you do what you do, your place in the world, and so on, then that's going to have a really, really broad effect on not just whether you walk 50 metres or not, but on everything that you do. And so this principle, I think, is really important in behavioural change. Very often clinicians find themselves giving instructions or giving directions to patients: do this, do that, walk here, run there, whatever it might be, in a prescription-like way. And in the short term, you can most likely induce some behavioural change. It's not the best way to support long-term sustainable behavioural change, though. And the way to do that is to kind of tap into the operating system of the person: attitudes, beliefs, values. Start manipulating benevolently, of course, manipulating the operating system. And once you do that, then we start to see more system-wide changes. So there you go. 6 principles. You do not. There are 82, 83. I don't know, 86. Look, there's probably 90 now, maybe even more. 90 theories of behavioural change. You do not need to. You certainly don't need to understand them all. You don't even need to know them all. But what you do need to know and understand is the principles that tend to sit across all of those theories, regardless of which one we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating area. And once again, to return back to the start, I think that human behaviour is an enigma, and it's challenging to understand why we humans do what we do, let alone get us to change what we do. But certainly, it needs to come within. One thing I've learned from you is the importance of actually identifying, connecting with people's core values and what's important to them. Because ultimately, it took me years to understand that people generally aren't going to do what they don't want to do.
Exactly.
And that sort of it was an epiphany for me to recognize that. And I don't know why it took me so long to learn that, because obviously I'm a slow learner. But yeah, I think being able to tap into people's core values and what's important to them, and help them to articulate that, and then have a support structure around achieving that, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I remember Simon, actually, you might not remember this, but one of the first times we ever met was at a conference, and it was, I don't know what year it would have been, but I remember lifestyle medicine was just really focused on the behaviors, of healthy eating, and and there was a lot of, all the science was wrapped around, let's look at the evidence for food as medicine and exercise as medicine, and all these other things. And I remember saying to you, as a psychologist, I think it's psychology that actually has a really, really important part to play in this lifestyle medicine movement and championing it, because ultimately we can know the science behind these things. And in fact, I'm tiring of reading randomized control trials demonstrating that, yes, exercise is good for this, and this other form of exercise is good. Yeah, I think what we need to be supporting people is, how do we get them to implement this? How do we get people to embrace this and make it part of their lifestyle? And so I admire and appreciate the work that you do in this space. And I think the health coaching, is just the right arm, really, of lifestyle medicine in the right hand in many ways.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir. I often talk about health behaviour change as the engine room of lifestyle medicine. This is where the rubber really hits the road. I mean, of course, in a whole vehicle, all the parts are important. You need the steering wheel, you need the pedals, you need the brake, the accelerator, you need the doors, you need the seats. You do need everything, and you need the engine under the hood as well. And behaviour change is that engine. Let's ask our listeners for a moment. If you're enjoying this podcast, we would love you to share it with someone that you know who might enjoy it as well. We'd, of course, love you to leave a rating or review if you're enjoying it in particular. And we would love you to send us a question related to lifestyle medicine, if you have one that you would like us to discuss here. We're happy to tackle pretty much any topic, aren't we, Darren?
We are.
that relates to lifestyle medicine and life in general. So if there's something on your mind that you're curious about, drop us an email. All the details are in the links for the podcast. As always, great pleasure to talk with you. And those 25 blocks of chocolate, they're in the mail.
On their way.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.